What would cause God to leave his own house? We've been talking about that in this 10-part series. If you're curious about what that is, stay tuned. This is so important. I'm telling you, this is exactly what God was talking about. You got this sexual immorality going on. You got the pastor stealing God's tithes. And you've got things going on in the church that grieve God to where the presence of God is nowhere to be found. Why? Because what invokes the presence of God, this is what, if you look back at the Old Testament, you look back at God's instructions on the temple and the tabernacle. When he first gave them the instructions on the tabernacle and told them how to build it, how to set up the tent, and how to put the Ark of the Covenant, blah, 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 blah. Once they completed all of the things that God said that he wanted, that was when his presence manifested and the glory filled the house. Okay, after they had done everything that he said to do. Okay, so now what's happening is that they are going in reverse. They are undoing all of the things that he said to do. They're undoing it all. They're undoing the holiness. They're undoing the heart of the priests that are supposed to be pure. That and having them with dirty hands where they're doing, stealing and doing sexual immorality and all that stuff, where they're dishonoring God, like all of the stuff that they did to get the presence of God there, they're undoing it. They're doing the opposite. And it is sending the presence of God out. Because that's the last thing that they did. The last thing that God instructed them to do when they set up the temple was to bring in the Ark of the Covenant. And the last thing that they did before Ichabod is that they sent the Ark of the Covenant out. So this is basically the reverse happening of what God said for them to do. They set up the tent, they did all of this stuff, and then the last thing they did was bring in the presence of God, the glory, the Ark of the Covenant, and now they've done all this stuff to defile the house of God, and the last thing they're doing is they're sending the glory out. And so this is what happens, is that they go into battle, they lose the battle, and the Ark of the Covenant gets captured. So now you have sent the presence of God out, and the Ark has been captured. This is so important, you guys. Oh my gosh. This is so important because God is just, look at how grieved he is. Like, he's basically telling the story of how his house got robbed, basically, how he got put out of his own house. He got evicted from his own house. This is just so sad. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day, with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head. When he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man hurried and came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set, so that he could not see. And the man said to Eli, "I am he who has come from the battle. I fled from the battle today." And he said, "How did it go, my son?" He who brought the news answered and said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great defeat among the people. Your 2 sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. And after the time of her death, the women attending her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer or pay attention. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel." because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. So they go into battle. The ark is captured, and this is when they come back to tell Eli, and he falls dead. And when they tell Phinehas's wife, she gives birth and names the child Ichabod. The glory has departed. So this is basically her pronouncement of this is finally happened, right? All the way back from Hannah, all the way up to now, they have just doing nothing but defile the house of God, spit in God's face, basically give God the middle finger, and finally they send his presence out. So this place is no longer the house of God. This is so sad. It's so sad. So now what we want to look at is the next question that I asked God after I completed that study, because this is basically when the original question that I was asking him about, what happened to what happens before Ichabod, and that answered the question right there. That was all the things that happened before Ichabod. And so the next question I had for God was, what happened with the presence of God while it was displaced, right? What was the presence of God doing while it was displaced? Okay. And the first thing that the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, is recorded doing is destroying idols, right? So the Philistines take basically it goes from the house of God, which is basically the temple of God. They take it to their quote unquote house of God, their temple of their God, right? And they put it in there. And so basically you take the presence of God from the house of God to the house of the enemy. Basically, that's basically what has happened. Now, this is so important, and I'm going to tell you why. This is what we've been seeing going on over the last couple of years, is that the presence of God has been destroying idols. And so I was talking to God about the 7 mountains, and he was specifically talking about the 7 mountains. And so if you think about the 7 mountains of influence, if you think about the influence of healthcare and medicine, people's trust has been completely destroyed in them, because it's come out about what they've been doing with the vaccines. It's come out about what they've been doing with C-19. It's come out about all the stuff that they've been doing with how the quality of the industry has gone down. And when you go to a doctor, you used to actually be able to go to the doctor and be helped, and now it's like you go to the doctor and you come back with 12 more things wrong with you, or worse things wrong with you. So people's trust has been eroded in those idols, things that people used to worship, and forget to see that God is the healer. That it's like they would just go 100% to the mountain of medicine, the mountain of health, quote unquote health. And so the trust has been destroyed in that mountain. And the same thing with the church. People don't trust the church. They don't trust pastors. They don't trust their church leaders, because they've seen so many people be corrupt, and they've seen so many people be shady. I've watched, so many people that talk about, when they, try to find a church home, that didn't used to be a thing. People would just go to the nearest church, and, they were happy with that. And so now it's just such a, people are trying to find the right church. They're trying to find one that's not shady, so it's like, as we have seen, and same thing with the music industry, the movies, all of these, celebrities have come out about, the shady stuff they're doing. A lot of them are going on trial for stuff. And so it's just the trust in all of these mountains and these idols is being destroyed. And that is what the presence of God was doing while it was displaced. It was destroying idols. It was one of the things that the presence of God is that is, and especially the glory, because the glory is a part of the presence of God. And the glory, what it does is that it commands attention. It does something that can only be attributed to God, and then that manifestation exposes darkness, right? Because if the enemy has been lying and saying that he's doing something, and he's convinced people over years that he's doing X, Y, or Z, they believe it. But then when the power of God, the presence of God, the glory of God manifests, it exposes the fact that the enemy hadn't been doing that at all. He's just been lying, right? It's kind of like when Elijah called down fire, right? It was, the corrupt, quote unquote, prophets had people believing that their God was basically catching this quote unquote altar on fire, right? And they had been lying and having people believe that, when they were really just had like a secret tunnel that they were going under and lighting the fire. And but they would just basically do this big huge ceremony, and they would do all this seance and all this stuff, and then at the right moment the fire would come. And so they had the people thinking that it was their God that was doing it. And so when Elijah went up to the mountain and was like, and challenged them and said, all right, whichever God can produce fire, that's going to be that's going to be God. They're thinking this is going to be a piece of cake, because we've been fooling these people all this time, and it's going to be fine. And it didn't work. God was the only one that could produce fire. And so it exposed those people that they were shady and that they were lying. And so that's what this represented, is that when Dagon was, their God was destroyed, it exposed the fact that God was real, and it exposed the fact that God was the real true God. And it basically exposed the fact that Dagon was not more powerful than God, right? It moved God to, because that's what glorify means, right? It means to lift higher, to make high, right? And so when God receives glory, it makes him higher than any other God. And that's what was happening with the presence of God. Exposed Dagon, and it made it clear to them that God was higher than their God. And so this is important because, a lot of times, if you think about with Moses, when people are corrupt and they're following the wrong God, they are going to be stubborn, and they're not going to submit to God because he's God and because the right thing to do. They will only submit to him because they're afraid and they feel like they have to, right? And so that's what was happening with Moses, right? When he went to go tell Pharaoh to let the people of God go, he wouldn't hear it. He was not trying to hear it just because God was God and that you need to obey. He wasn't trying to hear that. But when he got afraid, right? When his firstborn died and he was afraid, then at that point, that's when he's like, all right, I'm gonna let them go, right? It was out of fear. So, but it was like, once God showed them that, God is bigger than their God, then they submitted. Then they, they sent the Ark of the Covenant back, because they sent the Ark of the Covenant to 2 more different places, right? They sent the Ark of the Covenant to this quote unquote temple where Dagon it was. And then they sent it to another city, and the same thing happened. They were having tumors, and they were having rats and all of that stuff. And then they sent it to another place. And so they sent it to 3 places total, and before they realized, okay, this is not a coincidence. Like, this God is bigger than our God, and we need to submit. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, share, and subscribe. In the meantime, God bless you on your journey to freedom.